Welcome inside the voice of college football, Arkansas. I am your host, Austin Robbie. We've got a jam-packed show for you today. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the Ole Miss game from this past weekend, how much of a bummer it truly was, and then we're going to be focusing most of our attention on this weekend's game at the Memphis Tigers. It's a 3-0 football team, one of the best mid-major programs in the country. So I'm going to break that game down for you. We're going to be talking about their team, what they look like offensively and defensively, some of the key players for them. Then we're going to be talking about our team, some of the players to watch offensively, defensively, and ultimately I'm going to give you my trusted score prediction for the week. It was right the first 2 weeks, right? It was a little bit off on the score versus Arkansas State, but we were right for the first two games. If you watched the show to start the year, I made the claim that we would lose to Ole Miss, and then this past Monday, I decided to change my mind. I thought after the first 2 weeks of football, I've seen enough, and I thought that the defense looked better than it was. We'll get into a grade for them for this Ole Miss game, but it wasn't, and so I swapped it. I went from Arkansas to lose to Arkansas to win. I had a 27-24 prediction. I was a little off on some points, but ultimately we were unable to win this football game. So let's jump right into it today. We're going to be talking about the Ole Miss game first and what I saw from that game and what we can really maybe improve on going forward into this upcoming game. But I like to kind of give a grade for the offense and the defense. Post game, I didn't want to. I was doing a lot more like player specific things in terms of who was like maybe the MVP of the game offensively and the MVP of the game defensively. But because we lost, I elected to not do that. I thought, wasn't necessarily in good spirits to give an MVP for a game that we lost. So we're going to be talking about the grades. We're going to keep it pretty brief, but it was a tough loss, right? And the offense is where we're going to start to keep it a little more positive. I'm going to give the offensive grade an A minus, right? So I'm going to pull up some stats, some numbers. Taylor Green, 420 total yards of offense, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. Some of our leading receivers, Omega Blake had 81 yards and a touchdown. Mike Washington Jr. and Jordan Platt both had 53 yards apiece. Mike Washington Jr. also had 65 yards on the ground. Braylon Russell had a touchdown. Washington Jr. actually had 2 offensive touchdowns. So a lot of yards put up in this game for our offense. 305 passing, 221 rushing. That's over 520 yards of offense, which is awesome. Like we only punted once, and that's really what you hope to see from a team in an SEC game. And I gotta give them a lot of credit. That's why they get an A minus. They don't get an A plus because we did punt once, and then like any Arkansas fan knows, we turned the ball over on the last possession of the game when we had a chance to win the football game. And that's tough because, you hate that for Jalen Brown. But you also know at the end of the day, like that wasn't the only reason we lost that football game. So the offense to me gets an A minus. I really liked Taylor Green's play. If we're being really nitpicky, I thought he had a couple balls. I mean, he had 13 incompletions. And early in that game, he was around 50% completion percentage because he was missing some, I would say, I don't want to say obvious throws, but he was kind of sailing a few balls. He threw a couple that could have been intercepted, and so I'd like to see a little more consistency from him. But at the same vein, like he was the reason that we were even this close in this game, and he was our entire offense. I mean, 115 rushing yards, and if I believe I'm correct, he's our leading rusher right now, man. Over 300 rushing yards this season. Like that's just crazy. He's truly been our workhorse player. Um, from the passing perspective and the rushing perspective, yeah, right now Washington Jr. is our second leading rusher with 260. Taylor Green has 307 yards. He actually leads the SEC with 9.6 yards per carry among qualified candidates. So, like, the offense really did look good in this Ole Miss game. I was very impressed. We obviously, I think, as Arkansas fans, were impressed in the first two games, but we also didn't really know like the value of that. Right? Those were two opponents that we didn't expect. We had no problem winning those games. We didn't expect to have a problem, so we really couldn't tell what the offense really like could be valued at. Right? We didn't know if those two games were just because of the quality of the opponent or if they really did mean something and we had a chance here. And I think that we proved that. Like I genuinely going, and I will talk about it when we talk about the Memphis game. Like I genuinely think that we are going to have no problem scoring on Memphis. And we had no problem scoring on Ole Miss. And I do think Ole Miss, as time will tell, I think it's one of the weaker defenses in this league, right? They lost a lot of guys to the NFL, including a first round pick in Walter Nolan. But they had other guys like Princely Uman and Chris Paul Jr., former Razorback, that were very standout players on this team last year and that ultimately graduated and went on to the NFL. So they had to replace a lot. And a couple of those guys made plays in this game, but ultimately our offense I thought was phenomenal. And I think their defense is not well. But I got to give a lot of credit to the offense, and that's why they get an A minus, not an A plus. We punted once and we turned over the ball at the very end of the game, but this offense is what kept us in this game, and so for that I got to give them an A minus. The offensive line also looked pretty good. We really ran the football to me quite well towards the end of the game. So let's switch over to the defense, the less positive note of this game, and ultimately the reason we lost this football game. And I couldn't really give him anything else but an F. Like it was horrible. I think that let's say we score a touchdown on that final play, Jalen Brown doesn't fumble, we're up 42-41, and the defense holds. Then I'd give them maybe a D, maybe D plus, just because they would have had back-to-back drives of shutting down the opponent late in the fourth quarter, and you got to give credit where credit's due there. But one, that did not happen, and two, they still played horrible regardless, even if that had happened. So 41 points given up. I think that we're going to look back on this game if you're an Ole Miss fan and realize that this is the start of your quarterback and not like the big, like Austin Simmons is not going to be your quarterback going forward. I think Trinidad Chambliss will be. And I think Simmons came in there and you could tell that he was hurt, and injuries may also be a factor going forward. Like he may not be even healthy for the following weeks. But I think even if he was, man, Chambliss had 353 passing yards. He was their leading rusher as well as 62 yards on the ground. He had 3 touchdowns responsible for, and he had no interceptions, no turnovers at all. So if you're an Ole Miss fan, you're probably pleasantly surprised with how well he played. And as a defense, that kind of adds to this grade and why it's an F, because you got their backup quarterback. And I think I didn't know a lot about him, so I'm not going to act like I would have thought he was going to be a better quarterback than Simmons. But one of the things I baked into us, I think, winning this football game was the idea that Simmons was not Dart, and Simmons was not as good of a passer as Dart. I honestly think Simmons' mobility wasn't even as good as Dart's. So I think that to see Chambliss come in and really look good in both spots as a passer and a runner was devastating. And I would have rather had Simmons be the quarterback. And that's hindsight, right? I wouldn't have, maybe if you had told me before the game, hey, we're going to get Chambliss, is that better or worse? I would have maybe said better. But I don't know. It's tough look on your defense when the backup quarterback comes in. And I'm sure any player knows. And I would love to know from Pittman how much they prepared for Chambliss, because it is a different type of game. He's not quite the same player as Simmons. He's a little more dynamic with his legs. He's great in the pocket and being able to maneuver the pocket. And he proved to be a really good passer. And he was a right-handed quarterback too, so like that does affect some things. But I'd love to know from Pittman how much planning they went into. I mean, they knew Simmons was on the injury list, but it seemed, from all accounts that I understood to be, was that he was probable to play in this football game. So if we really did prepare for him, this is even more devastating. You don't get a pass that we didn't prepare, but it does make a little more sense on why we were so poor defensively. We held them, I believe, to 2 punts. Doesn't really matter, but ultimately we came up short, and that really is because of our defense. So I don't think there's really any way you could give them a grade other than an F. This was a defensive unit that I gave, I believe, an A minus last week against Arkansas State because I was so impressed with how we did. So going from an A to an F is brutal, and it shows in a loss against Ole Miss in a spot where we really had the chance to win, and the defense was just continuously keeping us out of this game, and they could not get stops. I know they got 2, but it's not a good look. And I'm hoping that going into this week, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, that we can really improve defensively and make Memphis not look as talented as Ole Miss did last week. So offense gets an A minus, but the defense gets an F. And so that's a little bit about the Ole Miss game. We ultimately lost 35-41. We are now 2-1, and we're going to be facing the 3-0 Memphis Tigers. So there's going to be a lot to talk about here. We're going to talk about us as an offensive and defensive unit, and also them as well. But first, we'll be right back.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the voice of college football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the voice of college football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
All right, we're back. Let's talk about this Memphis football game. So let's start with Memphis and kind of break down what we have and what we're looking at for them this week. So right now, this is a team coached by Ryan Silverfield. He's been head coach there since 2020. He's got a 69.2% winning percentage, and he's won double-digit wins the last 2 years. So 10-3 in 2023 and 11-2 in 2024. And a lot of that, I think, and we're going to really see this season as he's gone, is some of the production from a guy like Seth Hennigan. And this was a team that really relied on him. He was a guy, I don't believe he was drafted, but I believe he's on an NFL team right now. But he was very impressive for them. They're a team that, if you've followed college football for the last 10 or 15 years like I have, like they are, to me, one of the pinnacle of mid-major programs. They play in probably one of the best mid-major conferences in the American Athletic. And they've been really the staple. Like if you think about Houston and Cincinnati, and I'm trying to think of who else has been in the SMU, I believe was in the American, like these teams that have kind of graduated onto greener pastures in the Big 12 and the ACC. Memphis has been there the whole time and competed well against those teams, like when they were in there, and I think even when they've been out of there. So this is a program that is truly, to me, Memphis and Tulane right now are the two best teams. South Florida as well is up there, but two best teams, three best teams in the American Athletic Conference, and to me is going to probably the conference is probably going to represent the college football playoff as a mid-major program, and that's a really big deal. So right now this year they're 3-0. These are their wins: Chattanooga, at Georgia State, and at Troy. So 2 wins against the Sun Belt on the road. None of them particularly close. They won their first game by 35, the next one by 22, and this past one by 21. So they've looked good. Right now, the spread in this game is about 7.5. Obviously, Arkansas is favored in this game, and it's going to be in Memphis, Tennessee. So that's a really big component to this game that we're going to talk about. But let's look a little bit at them on the offensive side. I mentioned Seth Hennigan was the quarterback for the last couple of years for them. Now they've got Brendan Lewis, and he was a quarterback from Nevada who's transferred in. He was, I believe, an honorable mention all-conference for the Mountain West last year for Nevada. And Nevada wasn't a great football team, so that says a lot about who he is as a player. Right now, he leads the American Athletic Conference in completion percentage, 73%. He's got over 600 passing yards, so about 200 a game, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. And he's got 190 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. So he's their second leading rusher for this team. So that shows, once again, we're going to be playing a quarterback that's dynamic with his legs. If you thought about it this season, we've played each week, and it's been at different levels, right? Starting with Cornelius Brown IV at Alabama A&M, which is obviously an FCS school, to last week against Trinidad Chambliss from Ole Miss. And we've seen these dual threat quarterbacks week in and week out. And I think that's going to be a really beneficial thing for us this week, is this is the 4th time we've played this type of quarterback. Can we continue to get better against these type of quarterbacks? Because if you think about who we're going to play later on in the season, Marcel Reed for Texas A&M, Arch Manning from Texas. There's a lot of guys later on in the schedule. Bro Prabula from Missouri. Like there's a lot of guys later in the schedule that are going to be dynamic with their legs and be able to throw the football. And we've got to be prepared for that. So I think it's going to be a challenge once again, like it was this past week against Ole Miss. But I think it's going to continue to prepare us for the schedule we have coming. If you look at them, their running back position, Sutton Smith is their starting running back. He has 247 yards and 4 touchdowns so far this season, as well as 52 yards in the receiving games. They've got 2 guys that have already got over 100 receiving yards for their team. That would be Cortez Braham, a transfer also from Nevada, and then Jamari Hawkins, I believe, maybe a transfer, I'm not sure. But those 2 guys are their players. Braham's kind of an outside receiver, and Hawkins is more of a slot guy. But they're able to kind of do both. This is a team that's got 655 rushing yards, like I mentioned earlier, 608 passing from Brendan Lewis. So they're a fairly balanced team. So expect to see them try to run the football, and I think that we're going to be able to defend the run a lot better. But also look at them to pass the football as well. And if you look at us, and we're going to get to it a little more with our defense, we've given up almost half the amount of rushing yards as we have passing yards. So let's see how well they do from a running perspective. Their offensive line is fairly makeshift. I know a couple guys have left their team. One of them, Xavier Hill, went on to go play at Colorado this year. So they've had multiple guys leave. So it's a fairly new offensive line. A couple of them I know were mentioned as all uh, preseason players going into this year by some of the different places like Athlon Sports and Phil Steele. So I think they have a couple offensive linemen, specifically their tackles, that are going to be really big for them. But this is a fairly new offensive line. So we'll see if we could take advantage of that as well. So that's a little bit about them offensively. Let's talk about them a little bit more defensively. A couple of names to note that I want to throw out there from the defensive line. William Whitlow Jr., he was a player for them last year. I've seen him on a lot of preseason all conference stuff. But to me, their most impressive position is going to be their linebacker position, and that's Sam Brumfield and Everett Rusaw Jr. Sam Brumfield's transfer in from Virginia Tech. He was a fairly productive player for them. So if he can do that at the Power Four level, I think he can do that at the Group of Five level, and he's shown that so far. He's their leading tackler this year, 4 tackles for loss and 3 sacks. He's kind of a hybrid player. He's going to, get after it in the run game, but he's also going to be a threat as a pass rusher. He's currently their leading pass rusher with 3 sacks. So those are 2 guys just off the bat to watch. Another guy to watch, DeMarco Ward, defensive back for them, playing safety. He already has 2 interceptions, and both of them he took to the house. So that's big time. 2 pick sixes, which is a really big deal for them. Omarion Cooper is a guy I've seen as well, highlighted as a potential all-conference player. At the cornerback position, he's got 9 tackles on the season, and he leads their team and the conference as a whole with 4 pass deflections. So I expect to see them defensively prioritize a couple of things. And this is, they've played 3 teams, 2 of them in the Sun Belt, 2 of them, Georgia State and Troy aren't necessarily like Troy, I'm sure you've heard. It has been good previously. They've kind of lost some of their touch. John Summerall, their coach, is gone. So these 2 teams are not even necessarily really impressive Sun Belt teams as well. But if we look them from a defensive perspective on what they've given up so far this year, 526 passing yards. That's in 3 games, so about 175 yards per team, but 207 yards against the run, and that's 69 yards a game. Nice. But it's one of these things that they're going to be better against the run. And so to give up almost a third of your yardage from in the rushing yards to the passing yards, like that's going to be their priority. Priority is to stop the run, and I think we're going to be dynamic enough to get after it in the run game, but also be able to pass the football. I think it's going to be a real eye opener for Memphis this week as well. Like I think that we do benefit from the fact that they haven't played a real team yet, and that's not to disparage what they've done so far. They haven't kept a game very close. So at least in their 3 games, they've won and they've won convincingly. And they've only given up 33 total points, so about 11 points a game to their 3 opponents. But I think this is a completely different level opponent. And we saw that for ourselves at least last week. Like this was a team, we played Alabama A&M and we played Arkansas State, and neither of those opponents were that impressive. And we went into a spot where we were going to play a ranked team on the road, and they beat us up. And defensively, we were not impressive. And I expect to see our defense, at the very least, do better than they did last week. And I gave them an F last week, so that's not saying much. But I do think we're at a spot where we can look a little bit better on the defensive side of the football. So I kind of switched a little more to talking about the Razorbacks. But that's what I've got about Memphis from an offensive and from a defensive perspective. This is a team that's 3-0. If we're looking for names to watch, it's Brendan Lewis, it's Sutton Smith, and it's Cortez Braham on the offensive side of the football. And then on the defensive side of the football, it's William Whitlow Jr. on the defensive line. It's Sam Brumfield in the linebacking room. And it's DeMarco Ward in the defensive back room, specifically as a safety. So those are kind of the players to watch as a fan of the Razorbacks to see how well these players do for the Memphis Tigers and keep up with them in terms of seeing what they're able to do against us, either their defensive players against our offensive guys or against some of our defensive players, their offensive guys. So let's switch it over. We're going to talk about the Razorbacks in this game. And it's got to all start and end with Taylor Green. And Taylor Green's been the engine that's driven this offense so far this season. And I think a lot of Arkansas fans knew that was going to be the case. But I think to say that he would be currently tied for leading the entire FBS in touchdown passes, have a 182.7 passer rating, which is nuts, have an 11 touchdown to 2 interception ratio, which is nuts, be averaging almost 300 yards a game passing alone, which is nuts, averaging over 100 yards rushing a game. So this guy's almost responsible for 400 yards of offense week in and week out in these first 3 games. And he's gotten 13 total touchdowns. Like he is single-handedly been our offense. And what's crazy to me too, watching the games, and I'm sure as a fan you can relate, he hasn't even played his best football to me. Like he's right now looked like an A minus B plus quarterback in the fact that he still left plays on the table. He's sailed or underthrown a couple of throws or over like just kind of missed on some throws that he knows he wishes he had back. But he still played phenomenally. I mean, 68% completion is really good first and foremost. But like to me, with the players that we've had open receiving wise, I think he could be even pushing like 75%. And I know he would love to have those throws back. Um, but I think he's got a spot to take even more of a jump into another tier. Because right now, I think it's going to be tough because of our actual quality of our team and what our record will be. But I think he's like right now a fringe Heisman contender in the fact that he has just played so well from a statistical standpoint, and he single-handedly carried this team so far in these first 3 games. And I don't want to be too hyperbolic because it really only has been 3 games, but he's looked as impressive as you could have hoped for as an Arkansas fan. So it's going to start with him, and I think he's going to have a good game. He's not my player to watch necessarily offensively, but I think he's going to have a phenomenal game. I think he's a guy. Maybe he doesn't have 100 rushing yards against a really stingy Memphis run defense, but I think that he could have 300 to 350 yards responsible of total offense, and that may be 250 to 300 in the passing game. I think we're going to pass well. This is a team that gives up 200 passing yards a game anyway, and they haven't played quality opponents or quality quarterbacks. So I'm going to give that 100-yard boost to him in this game. I think he can throw for another 300 like he has in previous games. But I also think from the ground, he's going to get his 50 yards. He may even get 100. We'll see. But so far, right now, he's accounted for 13 touchdowns, and I think he's going to continue to raise that number up in this week. But let's talk about the running backs, Mike Washington Jr., Braylon Russell. These 2 guys are going to have a real game on their hands here because this is a run defense, like we've mentioned today, that's very impressive. The Memphis Tigers have only given up around 70 yards of offense on the run game alone, and that's including anybody that's running the football. So that's the quarterback, that's the running back. We're in a spot where we've averaged almost 250 yards rushing per game. So we're going to see who, when rubber meets the road, which unit is going to break more. Is it going to be the Memphis run defense, or is it going to be the Arkansas run offense? And I think the run offense is going to prevail. I don't necessarily think that we're going to be at that 250-yard mark. But I wouldn't be surprised if we're around that 150-yard mark, 150 to 200. Taylor Green, I think, will get his 50 to 75. And I think between the other 2 backs, we'll get 100 rushing yards. And maybe it's one guy this week. Maybe it's Mike Washington Jr. Solely. He's a guy that's really taken hold of this position. I thought Braylon Russell was going to have a good game last week. And I think at times, if you were really watching it, I thought he did well. Like he looked really good on that last scoring drive. Um, but I think he's so far, like he just hasn't been as dynamic right now. I'm looking at the numbers. Mike Washington Jr. is averaging 8.4 yards per carry, and Braylon Russell is averaging less than half of that with 4.1. They almost have similar carry numbers. Washington Jr.'s got 31 and 25 for Braylon Russell. So I think Pittman's given them both equal opportunity. You can just tell who's done more with it. And that's Braylon Russell, or that's Mike Washington. And Braylon Russell's been not as dynamic as a receiver either, and Washington's been really good. Like you saw Taylor target him multiple times in this past game. Washington was our second leading receiver in this Ole Miss game. So expect to see him featured even more. I wonder if it'll start to look like that with the carry numbers as well. Russell's continued to get his own, but will Washington start to surpass him? That'll be an interesting part to see in this game. But the receiving core to me is another spot that we need to talk about, and this is ultimately where I'm going to give you my offensive player to watch, and that's wide receiver Omega Blake. And we're going to talk about this receiving core a little bit. And Omega Blake's the one you start with in this room. 18 receptions, 266 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's almost averaging 100 yards per game, around 90 per game, and he's got 3 touchdowns, so averaging also about a touchdown a game. I think he's going to handle his own in this game. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes off for 100 receiving yards. He gets a touchdown. He's really been the guy for us. A couple other guys that have surpassed 100 receiving yards so far this season. Raylan Sharp, the slot receiver out of Fresno State. C.J. Brown, another guy who plays on the outside, inside, kind of does it all. He has 111 yards on 9 catches. And then Jalen Brown, who's our second leading receiver in terms of receptions, 10 receptions, 114 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He ultimately is going to be known, I think, for several weeks as the guy who fumbled football away in that Ole Miss game, but I think he can really have a bounce back game here because I do think he's been an impressive receiver. He's had a drop or two. He had the drop or two in that Ole Miss game. But I do think he is a good player, and I think he's going to bounce back in this game. But ultimately, the guy I'm telling you to watch, and who I think anybody watching the Razorbacks so far this season has noticed, is Omega Blake. He's the best receiver on this team, and I think he's going to continue to show that. I think he's a guy that's going to be on pace for an 1,000-yard season and really have a breakout year at the Power 4 level. So a guy who was really good at the Group of 5 level out of Charlotte. I think he's going to really prove himself in this game, and as he's continued to do so far this season. So that's a lot about the offense. I'm excited to also see our offensive line in this game and see what they can do from a run blocking perspective. If they can really get a hold of a lot of those Memphis defensive linemen, William Whitlow Jr., a guy I mentioned for them. Look for our guys, and those specifically in the interior of the offensive line running the football, the Fernando Carmonas, the Kobe Branhams, the Caden Kittlers. Let's see what they're able to do in this game from the offensive line perspective. But we'll switch it over to the defense, and this is where we're going to spend probably the majority of our time because there's a lot to talk about here, right? Starting off, we'll go just from an injury perspective. Kenai Walker suffers a really brutal injury on the field. Glad to see him doing a lot better. That was a scary situation. Ultimately, his status, I'm not sure where that sits for this upcoming game. I'm not going to talk about this defensive unit as if he's going to play this weekend. We're going to keep him out of that. But he looked good in this game, and I've talked about him throughout this season so far and how good of a player I think he is. But David Oke also is a guy that I want to talk about, and he's going to be my defensive player to watch. We're going to just jump right into it. He got a little bit of action in this past game, and I thought he looked pretty good. But I think he's going to have maybe his breakout game this week against Memphis. And I think he's for two reasons, really. One of them, I think he's just a perfect blend between run stopping and pass rush. Like he's a lighter guy. So I think he's proven at the FCS level that he can rush the passer, but also stop the run. This is a guy I think that had over 10 tackles for loss at Abilene Christian last year. Not a ton of sacks. So it really shows that he has the ability to stop the run, but also get after the passer a little bit. And I think he's going to prove that in this Memphis game. So it's nice to see him back and in a spot where I think he can contribute to this defensive line unit. And alongside him, Cameron Ball, Ian Jeffrard, I'm excited to see how well they do against this running offense of Memphis. And then on the defensive line side, if you watch that post-game show, I talked a lot about being able to get home from a pass rushing perspective and how we were just short multiple times over and over again of ultimately getting to the quarterback. And I'm interested to see Chambliss versus Lewis here. I'm sure Lewis is, to me, a less talented player, given that he is the starting quarterback for Memphis and not an SEC powerhouse like Chambliss is. But Quincy Rhodes Jr., Philip Lee, Charlie Collins, Justice Boone, can these guys get after the passer and ultimately get home? Because the more they're able to get home, the more they're able to keep our secondary from having to have just constant defense and constantly covering these receivers. We need those guys to get after the quarterback and ultimately get to him so that we can create big chunk plays defensively and not allow them to have big chunk plays offensively. So the defensive line is going to be interesting to watch. The linebacker unit to me has really been the steady force here. There's not a lot to talk about them each and every week. We talk about almost unit by unit every time we cover the defense, and this one's probably the unit I talk the least about. It's just because I think they're fairly dependable. Xavier Sorey Jr., Stephen Diggs Jr., these are our two leading tacklers so far this season. Sorey has multiple tackles for loss and an interception. They've been our most productive players. I want to continue to see good play out of them, mainly from a pass coverage perspective. I thought they looked a little slower in this game. I feel like we got outrun multiple times in that Ole Miss game. And I think, to me, Stephen Diggs Jr. was kind of one of the guys I watched multiple times, seeing number 14 getting beat by a receiver. And these guys aren't necessarily supposed to be able to outrun these dynamic receivers, but either through angles, tackling, or whatever it is, being in the right spot in coverage, you can't get beat as bad as I think some of them did in this Ole Miss game. So I'm looking for them to step up and have a bounce back game, and that's really every unit on this defense this week because of how poorly we played. But let's switch it over lastly to the secondary room. I assume we're going to get more play out of Jaheim Singletary, Kayshawn Davila, another guy, Stelman Bridges, some of those outside type corners. If Kenai Walker's not going to be able to go, And then Julian Neal, who I think's been fairly productive this year, and he's had a pretty good season. Currently, four pass deflections on the year, and an interception in that Arkansas State game. And then the secondary, the back end of it, the safeties, Larry Worth the third, Miguel Mitchell, Caleb Wooden. Wooden's a guy I've really become obsessed with. I think he's done a really good job this season. Shakur Smalls, Jordan Young, some of those nickelbacks there. I'm really excited to see how well they can do. I know that Memphis has a couple of good slot receivers that I've mentioned. So watching some of our nickelbacks in the slot and being able to cover those guys is going to be really, really key in this game. But ultimately, just at the end of the day, the defense as a whole, like it's time for them to step up here. And I'm going to give you my score prediction first, and then we'll talk about a little bit of it, specifically with the defense. I've got Arkansas defeating Memphis 31-24. And from the defensive perspective, to hold them to 24 points, we're going to have to really step up. This is a team that scored, or Memphis was a team that scored, or Ole Miss was a team, Matt, was a team that scored 41 points last week. So for us to drop down to 24, it's going to take a lot of effort on the defensive side of the football. I think anybody clearly watching college football would agree that Ole Miss is probably a step ahead of Memphis offensively. So I think naturally we're going to expect less points scored in this. But like to get down to 24, right, 3 touchdowns and a field goal, I think our defense is going to really have to step up. This is a team for Memphis that's played well so far this year. 45 points, 38 points, and 28. So they've gone down each week. I think they go down again, but they've proven to be able to score touchdowns, and that's a spot where we're going to have to continue to play better defensively, specifically against the pass. In my opinion, has been more of our weak point than the run. We've shown to be actually a fairly good run defense. We've only given up 340 yards, which is a little under 115 yards rushing per game, while passing we've given up 218 yards per game. So we're giving almost double up in the passing game, and that's where we're going to have to show up this week, especially if a guy like Kenai Walker is out. I'm really excited to see our pass defense here and hope that we can take a step that's necessary as we go into some more difficult games. Like Memphis is maybe a home game against Mississippi State or Missouri or Auburn. We'll see how those teams continue to shake out this year. But I mean, a lot of those teams that I just mentioned are ranked. Like we have right now 8 of our remaining games, according to the current rankings in the AP poll: Notre Dame, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Auburn, LSU, Texas, Missouri, all ranked games after this Memphis game. Literally, Mississippi State is the only unranked team right now that we have remaining on our schedule after the Memphis game. So, like, this is going to be probably the easiest game we've had left. And this is our last chance to me to get, I don't even want to say practice reps because this team is legitimately good and could definitely beat us. But it's our last chance to go up against a non-conference opponent and really get a shot to see how our defense can play against some of these SEC teams. And Notre Dame, Notre Dame is a non-conference opponent, but it's truly the last non-Power Four team that we're going to get to play and really see and give a test on how well we can be defensively. So score as well on the offensive side. I have us scoring 31 points. I think we could score more than this. We proved to score 35 against Ole Miss, and that was at Ole Miss. But I think Memphis's defense may be as good as Ole Miss's defense. So I think we ultimately win this football game. Right now, I'm looking at the spread, and it's got it 7.5. So this is right where I'm putting it. If it actually stays at 7.5, I guess that would mean to take Memphis in a plus 7.5. But we'll see if this line adjusts. I saw 6.5 earlier, so it's jumped up a little bit. And actually, according to this, it was minus 4.5 to open. So we're in a spot where it's continuing to climb. I think people are really believing that we can win this football game. I am as well, but I'm going to be very realistic in my expectations. I think this is a one-score game. I think they keep it close. Like I don't think this is a game like Arkansas State where we kind of run away with it. And our offense just looks so impressive, and our defense only holds them to 7 actual points. I don't think that's the case. I think we actually play a little more of a competitive game, and Memphis really punches back. So I hope that we're up for the test and we can win a game right at the end, because I think that we're going to need that. We're going to really need that experience. And I think to play in close games, which you don't want necessarily to play against non-Power 4 opponents, this is a really quality one. Like right now, if you look at the lines in terms of who's going to be that group of 5 representative, Memphis is in those top tier teams where people really believe that they actually could be the group of 5 representative in the college football playoffs. So this is a real deal team that has real expectations of a double-digit win season again. So it will still be impressive when we beat this team. We obviously are favored, so we got to get the job done. But I do think that we ultimately win this football game 31-24 and move to 3-1. So that's really it in terms of my previews and my predictions towards this. So, lastly, I just want to plug the show. And if you want to be a part of the show and be a part of this community, I'm going to encourage you to go to vocfb.com/shop. So, it's a voiceofcollegefootball.com/shop. You'll find a drop down menu on there. Teams, Arkansas is at the top, it's alphabetically sorted. So, you'll find us up there at the very beginning. So, if you want to contribute at all and get some sweet merch in that, go to vocfb.com/shop. So ultimately, to please like, share, subscribe to Arkansas at the Voice of College Football. Be a part of this content that we are producing throughout this season. We're going to have shows each week. Mondays, it's going to be roughly around 5:30. Clearly, this one was a little bit earlier. Our next show is also going to be, we've done a couple of post-game shows. We did one for the Arkansas State game and the Ole Miss game. So we're going to have a post-game show following the Memphis game. Hopefully it goes better than last week's post-game show and the fact that we actually win this game. But it's probably going to be around somewhere in that 2 to 3 p.m. We're playing the early game. We're playing 11 a.m. So it's going to be in the early afternoon. But further details are going to be posted. You'll see, I'll have it on there on YouTube, and you'll see it there and closer to that game time. But it for the last two games, I've been able to do something pretty much 5-10 minutes after the game ended. So be ready for that. It could be right after game around 2:30, 3 p.m. So on that note, we're going to see you Saturday after the game for a post-game reaction and hopefully a 3-1 Arkansas Razorback team that's got to win against the Memphis Tigers. So God bless. Go Hogs.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.